After going through the part 1 of module stages in physical evidence analysis, reader must have learnt about the initial stages of crime scene investigation like protection of crime scene, recognition of evidence and searching of evidence at the crime scene. In the present part 2 of these module, further stages like documentation of crime scene and marking of evidence in physical evidence analysis related to crime scene investigation has been discussed in detail. Reader will become aware about the procedure, how effectively the physical evidence can be documented and marked before they are collected, preserved and packed at the scene of crime.
Learning outcomes. After studying this module, you shall be able to know about the stages of documentation of a crime scene and marking of evidence in physical evidence analysis. You will learn the procedure applied effectively for the documentation of physical evidence before they are collected, preserved and packed at the crime scene. Now, let us move to the stages in physical evidence analysis. In the earlier module, that is the part 1, various stages in physical evidence analysis have been discussed. Out of those stages, protection of crime scene, recognition and searching of evidence has been discussed in detail. In this present module, the following stages in the crime scene have been discussed in detail. That is the documentation of crime scene and physical evidence. One of the most important stage in the physical evidence analysis is any crime investigation is to properly document the crime scene and the physical evidence recovered from there. The main purpose of documenting the crime scene is to maintain a record of the evidence recovered and the observation made at the crime scene. A complete and accurately recording of the scene helps in the proper investigation of the crime and later on presenting the case in the court of law. Documentation of the crime scene begins as soon as the first officer reaches the scene. The case may belong to any class, whether it is a burglary case, homicide, accidental death or assault, etc. The first officer at the scene is one of the most important persons who can give initial information about the case and play key role in creating the thorough documentation of the crime scene. As soon as he arrives at the scene, he has to assess the situation quickly and make a number of decisions on the spot to secure and protect the chaotic scene as far as possible. He has to maintain the control of the scene and adequately secure and protect the scene so that no evidence may be lost or cleaned up. Besides this, the first responder has to perform set of responsibility irrespective of the type of evidence. He must protect himself. If any person is injured at the scene, then on priority provide him medical care at the earliest. If at all possible, identify the witness and suspect. He has to remain connected with his office for any instruction or suggestions. Keep preparing notes or narrative description of the actions taken and observation made before handling over the investigating officer. He has to keep in mind that evidence tend to prove or disprove any alleged piece of information. But still, the type of documentation made by the first responder or officer is different, that is the preliminary, then the documentation done by the investigative officer, which is thorough and is important from two points of view, that is the legal point of view and the forensic point of view. It is required that nothing should be altered until its original location, condition, along with their relation to the scene and other objects have carefully documented with sufficient details. Various methods of the documentation of the crime scene are available, but no single one of which is the best. the crime scene investigator has to follow the method finalized by his department, each of its unique characteristics to be offered. Normally, it is necessary to use more than one method and is also desirable to employ all of them in one or other circumstances because they are complementary to each other. In certain situations, particularly when a suspect is in custody and has confessed the crime, investigators sometimes assume that the case is solved and conclude that only brief documentation may serve the purpose. But it is always safe to remember that every major crime scene and the associated evidence ought to be thoroughly documented, even if a suspect has confessed. During the initial stages of any crime investigation, no case is open or shut case. The investigator probably will not get another opportunity to rectify his or her mistakes if documentation or evidence collection performed casually at this particular point. Cases in which there is no question about the suspect identity can become the most difficult to solve later on, and the detailed reconstruction are often crucial for satisfactory resolution of the case. Successful reconstruction are impossible without proper documentation. A successful crime scene investigator has to be a good interpreter rather than a mere recorder and observer. Should also be able to seek out more information from less obvious evidence based on what has already been observed and what might be available to anticipate the question that may arise and required in the resolution later on. The investigator, to be successful, must try to develop an adequate guess, that is, hypothesis, which explains the action taken at the crime scene. So those facts tending to support or refute action must be noted and documented properly. So a working hypothesis will help the investigator to make order out of cause and recognize useful evidence among the numerous unrelated articles present at the scene. The working hypothesis becomes necessary to reevaluate and modify further if new observations have been added to the investigation to produce a suitable and workable theory. The evidence must be critically evaluated. However, with the addition of new observation, it becomes necessary to reevaluate and modify the working hypothesis. Still, further modification may be required in the days that follow the scene investigation to produce a suitable theory. The formulation of workable theory may not be feasible unless the scene and evidence have been properly and thoroughly documented. The following are few methods among the practical methods available for proper documentation, which can be used either individually or in combination. Practically, all of them should be used collectively to achieve a complete and accurately recording of the scene. They are notes, sketches, photography and video recording. Notes. Written notes forms the foundation of crime scene and physical evidence documentation techniques and are very important in any investigation, even when other means of recording are used. The following instruction must be followed while preparing the extensive notes. The notes must be made in ink in a bounded notebook rather than on the loose leaf paper. The notebook pages must be consecutively numbered in advance to avoid any subsequent allegations out pages have been removed or destroyed. Notes must be thoroughly and complete as possible, and attention must be given to mention the details of each and every step and process of the crime scene investigation. All the entries must be made in strict sequential order and blank spaces should not left to allow any out of sequence entry later on. Notes must have accurate measurements specific the direction of the crime scene and exact location of every evidence found. Example, 5 inches south of west corner of the table. In addition of it, initial notes must contain the following information taken by the crime scene investigator, that is, the name of the police station, date and time of the crime when the first information reported to the police, type of crime, description and location of the crime scene, and record the name of the person who collected the evidence like fingerprints, footprint, etc., who took the photograph, who has made the sketches of the crime scene. Then the exact location of the evidence, detailed description of interior and exterior of the crime scene, weather and lighting conditions during the crime scene investigation. Notes must contain an additional documentation of evidence collected besides showing their location at the crime scene with the help of photographs and video recording before collection, packaging and tagging of any evidence. Notes should also include a record the data related to the photographs taken and also mention the photographic condition, the date, time, frame number, subject matter, location and so forth. These information is expected to play very important role for successful interpretation of the photographs. These are just a few of the considerations that a crime scene investigator must follow while preparing the notes. In the most of the investigation, it is the written notes that tie together the other means of documentation. Errors made during the note taking have to be corrected by drawing a line through them rather than making obliteration or alteration or removal of the pages. Now let us see about the sketches. The notes and photographs are an important and vital means of any crime scene documentation, but sketches provide the best means to show a special relationship of the objects present at the crime scene with all the significant dimensions, including the distance between the item of the evidence and with the fixed object accurately recorded. So, sketches are an indispensable tool in crime scene documentation. Proper scene documentation can't complete unless a rough crime scene sketch is created at the crime scene itself. It serves to record the objects, their positions and their relationship in significant detail to follow a finished or smooth sketch by an investigator or even by architecture or the professional draftsman at the later stage. A bird's eye view sketch is especially important when the crime scene is spread out over a large area such as a house. Sketch is a permanent record of the size and the distance relationship of the crime scene and the physical evidence present in it. Special information present within the photographs or video documentation can also be clarified in the sketch because the other methods do not allow the viewer to estimate the distance and dimension. A sketch is the most simplistic manner to present the layout of crime scene and their measurements. The sketch itself does not require to be accurately drawn as long as enough information is available to allow an accurate version to be reproduced at a later time, that is, the inter-evidence relations and relations with the scene should be clearly visible. A sketch can't be competent with the photographs but can provide a wider representation of the crime scene. In the same way, the photographs taken at the crime scene does not elevate the need to make sketch. Even photographs are excellent means for recording large amount of fine details. Still, they often produce a false sense of perspective and do not normally allow accurate dimension and spatial relationship to be determined. Recovery of this information might become possible if photogrammetric Techniques like map making were used in the crime scene, but has not yet been applied to any great extent in the crime scene workout. Another advantage of sketch is that unlike photographs, they allow the most significant objects and details to be emphasized. The information recorded in the sketches and photograph is complementary as shown in given figures. The figure is showing the actual crime scene with the help of photograph, and the another one is showing the sketch for the same photograph. Making sketches at the scene has another more often unrealized advantage. The process of making the sketch depends upon the investigator's power of observation and experience. Some of the details might thus recognize that would escape noticed if an investigator were just casual or has less experience. The controlled observation fostered by making elaborated rough sketch are one of the greatest attributes of this method. Now let us see the following points which should be kept in mind while performing the sketching. The sketch need to be prepared on the spot, not in the office or residence. The distance should be measured accurately between the items of the evidence and the fixed object. The direction should be clearly indicated to the top of each sketch. If required, a compass may be used to find out the direction. Superfluous material should not be introduced. Instead, symbols, letters, digit or legend should be used to avoid crowding. Crime scene investigation offer valuable hints on and suggest different methods of producing sketches. Investigator should be familiar with the variety of sketching methods, but particular method is less important than diligence, attention into detail and to the investigative outlook. Three-dimensional or cross-projection sketches are generally the most useful for depicting the interior crime scene, but they are not always necessary. Now, let us move to the photography. Whosoever competent an investigator might be in illustrating a crime scene, photographers can be said to be capable of conveying the same story more easily and in an authenticated manner. The importance of a photography in a crime scene investigation is well known to everyone. Along the crime scene sketches, it is most simple and powerful means of documenting a crime scene. Photographs are extremely useful source of providing small but significant pieces of information with precise measurement of their site where the crime took place. Whether a video camera is accessible or not, it is extremely essential to click still photographs. The purpose of a crime scene photography is to document every part of crime scene thoroughly and keep accurate record of the physical evidence present. Forensic photography is an integral part of the trial, and most of the judgments are often upon the crime scene photographs to prove evidence as a prima facie. Photography is a superb means of documenting a vast amount of intricate details, but as already discussed, it must be used to complement rather than supplant other documentation techniques. The photographer must take photographs before anything is disturbed and keep clicking photographs, starting the scene from the outside to close-up pictures of the trace evidences. Many photographs of the entire scene should be clicked to show the relationship of evidence to the overall scene. The crime scene photographer should capture the whole scene first using the wide-angle shots covering the entire scene. Depending upon the crime scene, that is the indoor, outside or both, or it can be the vehicles, the photograph has to adjust camera setting according to their available light and weather conditions. During an important investigation, the experienced crime scene photographer is of huge advantage, and he should make sure that overall photos of the scene are taken to show the approach to the crime scene and location of the street light, in relation to the actual scene. Street addresses and fixed objects at the scene which can help to identify the spot. Photographs of every room in the house should also be taken, even if there is no apparent relationship to the crime scene. Photographs of the scene has to be taken in a clockwise pattern before altering the location and position of the body and other evidences present at the scene. Photographs this scene is such a way that every small object present at any corner of the scene should be covered, because sometimes some of the object seems to be unimportant at the time of investigation but become important as the investigation proceeds further. Photographs the body and the immediate vicinity around. If you have a camera boom, take pictures from ceiling to height down of the victim and other evidences. This perspective often shows the things missed when viewed from the ground or eye level. Close-ups can then be used to record the details of the specific items of the evidence. Such photographs should always have a scale and preferably two scales placed at the right angle to one another. Lighting is very important in crime scene and evidence photography. In certain circumstances, there is an advantage in taking several shots of a single object under different lighting conditions. Maintain a photo log in notes. When photography the exterior or an indoor scene or an exterior scene, one must be able to take photos of the spectators who are standing around and watching the activities. Many times the perpetrator returns to the scene to observe the actions of the police or fire person. This seems to be especially important in case of arson. Additionally, photos may help to identify reluctant witness who can be identified and interviewed at a later time. A 35mm film or digital camera can be used for overall shots of the scene and for close-ups of a particular items of the evidence. The details of a pattern must be recorded for future comparison and individualization purposes. A sheet film camera, particularly a view camera with fine-grained film, can be wiser choice, although a 35mm can often do the job. One should not fail to record such pattern because a large format camera was not available. Different types of lighting also play an important role. Additional attention must be paid to the necessary trade-off amongst the depth of field, lens opening, shutter speed, film speed and grain size, etc. When color film is being used, the color temperature or color balance of the light source must be well thought out. Now let us move to the audio and video recording. At the crime scene, audio and video recording methods are less frequently used than other documentation technique. If a video camera is available, crime scene video recording should be first step to the document a crime scene. The overview and moving analysis of the scene can also be presented in the court if required. This documentation method should be used as adjacent to the notes, sketches and photography, but not as the substitute for them. Crime scene video recording allows to document the crime scene which cannot be captured in reports, interviews or photographs. Prior to video recording, the investigator should walk the designated area through the scene. Videos should begin with an overall general view of the scene. If the scene is indoors, then the video should include an overall pan of the outside the location. The recording must then include a brief preamble by the investigator, which includes the name of the narrator, the case number, date, time, place of the incidents and concise description of all rooms and evidence to be viewed. Video recording can provide a perspective on the layout of the crime scene, which cannot be made apparent in the photographs and sketches. It is more natural to relate the structure of the crime scene with the evidence present at the scene. The recording should begin with the general overview of the scene and the area surrounding the crime scene. The recording should continue throughout the crime scene investigation using various types of lenses like wide angle, close-up and even micro, extremely close-up, to demonstrate the layout of the evidence and their significance. A large number of details can be documented by video audio recording without diverting the attention of the investigator from the observational task. The documentation method has the great advantage at the scene where it is necessary to record lots of details of varying or unknown importance. Additionally, one or both hands can be left free to make notes or sketches. Perhaps only drawback of this documentation method is the psychological one. Mostly the people are simply not comfortable taking into a tape recorder, particularly if other people are within hearing range at the scene. But frankly, if this shyness is taken over, then the audio recording can be used with the great advantage. The audio notes have to be transcribed into the written notes at the earliest and made part of the written notes, which focuses on relevant details. It could be called as transcription of that particular audio clip. Tape can be preserved as such until the case has been closed. Some of the details which do not seem relevant at the time of documentation might become important as the investigation proceeds further. A good quality camera and a portable video recorders have become easily available during the past decade and they particularly useful at the crime scene investigation. Video methods can't be substitute for photography. A major disadvantage of video documentation is that it is best way to produce overall record of the scene and also includes the running narrative on the soundtrack as an additional aid. The videotape recorder can also document very effectively the process of evidence collection as well as the sequence and location of each still photograph taken. A good video recorder allows a successful viewer who has not at the scene to get the lay of the land and help in understanding the relationship of various items of the evidence to the scene to the act being investigated. The detailed information can be communicated to the laboratory scientist who cannot examine the evidence to the best advantage. If a laboratory examiner cannot go to the scene, the video recording method is one of the best means of bridging this particular gap. Now, let us move to the marking of evidence. The basic and most important responsibilities of the crime scene investigator is to locate, document and collect, pack and mark the evidence found at the crime scene. Careful marking and recording of every piece of evidence found is very important. This may seem to be very simple, but it becomes complicated when multiple crime scenes or incidents encountered. Then it becomes difficult to coordinate evidence marking across the crime scene. So there is a need to develop a cohesive and a foolproof system for marking evidence to avoid confusion and build a stronger case. After collection, the evidential materials are required to be packed, and before they are packed, the marking of evidence is necessary. The primary purpose of marking items of the evidence is to assure its ambiguous identification of the items of the evidence collected from the crime scene at a later date. The tagging or labeling or marking of the evidence aids to the credibility and control to our ability to identify a particular item later on. In certain cases, maybe due to variable shape and size of the item of the evidence, it becomes difficult to decide how best to mark a particular item. Knowledge and experience of the investigator plays an important role before a discussion is made concerning how and where it should be marked. It is also necessary to consider the way in which evidence is relevant to the investigation and how it will be examined to the laboratory. If at all marking process obliterates areas containing the marks or other important information, the evidence may be rendered valueless. Guidelines can be obtainable for dealing with the commonly encountered evidence types, but nothing can substitute for forensic science knowledge and experience in non-routine situations. The decision regarding proper marking is generally easier when relatively large size items of evidence are encountered. With small items which presents no clearly unimportant or uncritical or non-critical sites, the decision might be taken not to mark them at all. If it is to be decided that such an object cannot be marked, an identifying sketch or photograph depicting the unique feature of that item should be made available so that the items can be recognized later. In other type of cases where space may be available but it may be limited, that it is not possible to include all information, perhaps only the investigator initials and single digit recognition number can be accommodated. In these types of cases, it is particularly important to have the marking process. Any code used can be thoroughly documented in the notebook. With the every small item such as trace evidence, it is obvious impossible to mark the evidence, but only the packaging can be marked. In sexual and other assault cases, garments can be usually be marked by securing the affixing a tag or label them, or by writing with the indelible pen or some inside surfaces such as pockets, waistbands and linings, etc. These surfaces are often not dyed and offer good contrast to the dark inks. Care must be exercised so that the bullet hole, cuts and stains are not disturbed. Many other relevant large items of evidence can be handled in a similar fashion. In addition to the markings applied to the evidence to the identifying later, other markings may also be necessary, like indicating the origination or fragility, etc. of the article of the evidence. This is particularly true of piece window of glass remaining in a frame and other fragile items. There are many possible systems that you can use to mark evidence. Some departments use a combination of numbers and letters or includes a breakdown which specifies the location, such as the bedroom 1, bedroom 2, outdoors or vehicles, etc. It doesn't matter whatever system you decide to use, you need to be clear and consistent and make sure that it will work. If you are dealing with multiple crime scenes at the different location or incidents, your system must be clear to all stakeholders, like anyone working on the case, including other crime scene officers, lab technicians and other experts. The clarity of your system is especially important when you go to the court. There should not be any confusion because of the way you marked your evidence. Your evidence needs to be marked so clearly that it is easy to understand, particularly when you go back to your notes and follow what you did, whether your case has just happened in the last few months or maybe the year ago. So take time to develop a clear system that can coordinate well with the stakeholder and will be well worth with the efforts. Now let us summarize what we have learned in this module. The main purpose of documenting the crime scene is to maintain a record of the evidence recovered and the observation made at the crime scene. A complete and accurate recording of the scene helps in the proper investigation of the crime scene, later on presenting the case in the court of law. Working hypothesis will help the investigator to make order out of the cause and recognize useful evidence among the numerous unrelated articles present at the scene. The working hypothesis becomes necessary to reevaluate and modify further if observations have been added to the investigation to produce a suitable and workable theory. Crime scene video recording allows to document the crime scene which cannot be captured in reports, interviews or photographs. Prior to video recording, the investigator should walk to the designated area through the scene. The basic and most important responsibilities of the crime scene investigator is to locate, document, collect, package and mark the evidence found at the crime scene. Thank you.